Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rocket Lasso Live, Season 3, Episode 10. We're already 10 episodes in. Time flies. And today, obviously, the big news is we have S24 to talk about. The entire episode will be built around questions for S24. And to help us on this journey, we have a guest, again, of Rick Barrett. And let's let this transition over. And hello, and welcome.
Hey, everybody.
So this seems to be working well. Hopefully everything goes smoothly. But everybody should know Rick from MAXON in general. He's already been the guest on the live stream at least 2 different times. And he's back again today. He knows the new material as well as anybody. And we've got a bunch to cover. So first of all, everybody, we're not going to be tackling general like motion graphics questions. It's more about focusing on S24, the new features. So anything along those lines, like feel free to put it into the chat. I'll be going back and forth between YouTube and Twitch as always. Oh, look at that. We have 2 Zachs now. There's I Go By Zach and Brother Zach. We got a lot of people hanging out already, though. We got Scott and Brian, Pro Tools, of course, Pierre. How's our sound levels, by the way, everybody? Do a sound check, Rick.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. How's our levels? So, who else we got? Sid, what's going on? Mumphies, Rogue. On YouTube, we got David already, RBLX, Ninja, Sean. More people showing up all the time. So we are competing with the official MAXON stream right now, so we want to make sure this is some good content. But in any case, it's going to be, it's all S23 goodness all the way anyway. So while we're going... Rick, do you want to give us a quick update of all the goings on over at MAXON? I'll switch over to your screen. You give us a little overview as questions come in.
Sure.
Let's
so
give a second
I'm
to pop
sure.
Over. And okay, your screen is up.
Okay. So I'm sure most folks here already have heard about our new MAXON brand and logo, our new website. Really exciting stuff, and of course Cinema 4D S24. We also have announced the immediate availability of Redshift for Mac, and there is a new build of Redshift that came out yesterday with enhanced integration with Cinema 4D. And in addition to that, we've got a new version of Moves by Maxon, our facial capture tool that works with iOS. And so that's the main news. And of course, we're streaming all week from 3dmotionshow.com. So there's Thanasis and Matthias talking. And tomorrow, we've got Jake Ferguson presenting, Brian Coleman, David Brodeur, and of course, Beeple, Mike Winkleman. Will be doing it every day live. So make sure to tune in tomorrow on 3dmotionshow.com.
Yep, I'm going to put the link for the 3D Motion Show into both the chats. So as soon as you're done here, you should go and continue to check out the programming there and tomorrow. But let's see if we got any questions starting to come through. I'm going to go back to, I guess, both of our faces. And we'll see what people are asking about. Well, Rogue Electron is asking, is S24 an automatic upgrade?
It is not an automatic upgrade in that it won't actually pop up in your R23. You can go download. If you are a subscriber, though, you have access to it. You can go download it and just load it up, log in with your My Maxon account, and you'll have access.
Brother Zach, if you could be more specific with that modeling question for any specifics so we can address it better. Let's see.
Brian Wade Scott is mentioning, and indeed we did we acquired Forger, which is a really cool sculpting app on the iPad and the iPhone, although you'd pretty much want to use it on an iPad. So really exciting with Moves by Maxon and now Forger starting to move the Maxon ecosystem onto mobile devices.
Which is cool. I haven't gotten to touch the Forger stuff yet. What would you say is the biggest use case for Forger and Cinema 4D workflow?
You know, our goal is to empower artists to create wherever they feel creative, right? And often that's not in front of your desktop computer. And certainly with the power of the Apple Pencil and the iPad, sculpting, on your couch or, out at the park is ideal. And so that's a lot of what we're looking for with Forger.
Let's see. We got two questions. Well, there's one. This might be Dean asking, and he might be asking on my behalf, and I haven't checked it specifically. But in R24, well, in the last couple versions of Cinema, the dynamics haven't been refreshing properly. When you go back to the time of 0, you go back to 0, and you have to like go 1 frame forward before it actually refreshes. And I think that's what they're asking about. I haven't checked to see if that is working or not, but we will definitely go check that out.
Yeah, I couldn't say either.
Viruckus is asking a question about, well, he's saying that he's getting a little bit of penetration from objects with the new dynamic place tool, but I think there's one very specific setting you need to change for that. So, Rick, would you like to do a
Sure.
dynamic place tool demo? Okay, heading back over to your screen. And I mean, there's the scatter tool, the new scatter tool, and the new dynamic placement tool are the most fun new features for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I can't believe how well these work and how fast the dynamics are and everything. So when you go into the dynamic place tool, there's a couple things that are really important to keep in mind. One is the scale setting. That really clues the dynamics in to what size of objects you're placing. So in this case, these are accurate to scene units. So, I'm placing things that are like they're centimeters big. And actually, so I like to go in and set this to, well, it's centimeters. And then the other thing is the collider geometry. So if I turn on this visualize colliders, you're going to see the actual colliders that are being used in this scene. And if we look at this jar, for instance, one part of the genius of this is that, experienced Cinema 4D users who have played with dynamics know that a concave shape collides much slower than a convex shape. And so basically what we have done is simplified created a method where all the geometry is simplified down to boxes. And these accuracy and grouping settings allow you to control how simplified it gets. So if I turn this all the way down, you're going to see that the lid, the jar is now completely solid. So I wouldn't be able to actually place things inside the jar now. But as I increase this, it takes a closer look at the geometry, basically, and creates more of those box colliders. So it's going to get slightly slower, but it's going to be increasingly more accurate. I find I still get really good performance if I crank these up to like 8 and 8. And so I tend to sort of start there. And then, of course, you can turn the visualize colliders off. And you can jump down here and use this purple handle, which is amazing, and just sort of spread everything out. You can use the rotate tool. You can move things up and down. And the really fun thing is at any point you just hit the shift key while you're dragging, and it'll actually cause everything to fall down with dynamics. And then, of course, you can go in and find individual elements here and move them around some more. So yeah, that's the dynamic place. It's amazing in its simplicity, really. But yeah, the key thing to get really good dynamics is setting that scale appropriately and then adjusting your collider geometry accuracy.
Yep. Sorry. And it's really fun and it's really intuitive. And if you were watching my demo yesterday, like you were able to throw a lot of objects at it and with a lot of crazy subdivisions. So I was putting hundreds and hundreds of objects into the scene and just dragging them around, and everything was working like really well. Can a floor object be used? I don't know. Does it acknowledge the floor? I haven't.
Yeah, it should. This has a plane. Let's see. I actually don't know. Got the handle. No. Apparently a floor does not work.
Okay, well, it's looking for actual geometry. Also, a quick
actual
heads up, it does look like we're getting a slightly lower frame rate from your stream. So we'll slightly avoid doing the things that require real-time report, and I can demo those. But yeah, it has no geometry. But yeah, that makes sense there. Oh yeah, and Simon is asking, can can any of this be keyframed? And yesterday I was getting some questions about if you could use like cappuccino to go and capture that. And I understand the instinct to want to reach for that, but that's not what this is. This is a placement tool. It's a tool for placing things. So all this is doing is moving and rotating the objects. So I don't think there's any way of capturing that dynamically speaking, right? You would actually build
it
a
works
dynamic
with cappuccino.
Oh, no kidding. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to show that, then I'll completely take that back.
So let's grab these platonics.
I just assumed.
We'll start real time, and I'm just gonna hit shift, and then we'll drag these around a little bit and stop real time. Well, hang on. It worked yesterday. Maybe I didn't work fast enough here. Let's turn that on. Okay, I swear it worked yesterday.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that. See if you can figure it out.
It maybe it only works with a single object at a time. Let's try that. Yeah, there we go.
Oh,
with a single object at a time, it'll work.
Oh, but if you, oh yeah, that would be tricky because I was going to say if you make them all a child of a null, but you can't run it on the null because it's going to be using them as a single unit. So then hierarchy wouldn't work.
Right.
A lot of the fun of this would be having multiple objects selected.
Right. But like you say, ultimately, if you're trying to do a dynamic simulation, use the dynamics solution. This is mostly set up so that you can create sort of realistic, chaotic piles of things for set dressing and things like that.
Well, it's funny because I started seeing some questions about like applying, when you're using the scatter tool, applying masks and like all these advanced details. And it's like, but wouldn't you just use a cloner at that point? Like if you're trying to procedurally generate the placement of a scatter, like the point of these tools is to artistically interact with placement and to do a lot of the recording and whatnot. It's like, well, now you're not artistically interacting with it, but I can see why keyframing something would be fun. So we'll keep that in mind.
Right.
Debbie Art, apologies, is saying how are they supposed to follow 2 live shows? So yeah, apologies. I mean, both of the different shows will be recorded, so you can watch one or the other afterward, and I won't be upset if you're checking out the MAXON stream. Although you guys started streaming a lot more often, which is cool, but it complicates me trying to work around the schedule.
Yeah.
Crossfader's asking if any dynamics were updated in general because of this. I think the answer is no, right?
No, I mean, there were some things under the hood, but they don't affect the built-in rigid body dynamics at this point.
Let's see. Dean is asking, the placement tool seems to act a lot like the add hair tool, and I guess visually it does, but then is asking, would they react with forces? And I don't think so, right? At that point, scatter is just storing, I'm assuming that the scatter is just storing the information that is, here's where it is, here's how it's rotated, and this is what the object is.
Right.
But I think I already had mentioned to Rick, I was putting an official feature request that the scatter object could be fed effectors, because that would be pretty neat.
Yeah, agreed. And I think you'll see some additional work on the scatter tool in the near future to continue to make it a little bit more procedural. I mean, we do want to keep the tool, as simple as possible, but, we're definitely hearing all of that feedback from users.
Yeah. And now Patrick is already looking to combine the scatter tool and the dynamics placement tool to just paint in piles of objects. That would be neat, but
you kind of can. I mean, if I take this nut, for instance, and I turn on the scatter pen and we just paint in some nuts, I can go in and enable edit mode. And this allows me to go in like with the place tool, for instance, and select and place a single nut, but I can also go into the dynamic place tool and I can dynamically place this single nut, which somehow ended up below the floor.
Yeah, I tried that and I had a little bit of trouble with it. So I was like, okay, maybe the scatter tool when it's live doesn't like. Oh, yeah,
There, it's working. So yeah, it does work with single scattered elements when you're in edit mode. If you want to do multiple elements, yeah, you just make it editable, and then you can select the instances and work with them that way.
Well, let's see. Let's see. Somebody says Noseman just finished his session, and I guess it's a good time to mention that he's going to be the guest not next week, but the week after, I believe. Next week is going to be Casey Hupke, and we're going to be spending all of our time just in the Scene Manager and Scene nodes. That's the plan, anyway. Let's see, a question that I can guarantee we're not going to get an answer to, but somebody asking is, what is the timeline for the Scene Manager taking over for the Object Manager?
I mean, it's going to be a process. We're continuing to build additional functionality into the node-based core, both, to replicate the existing classic C4D behavior, and then also, ideally, we want to create new solutions and new workflows in the new core. So it'll be, an ongoing process over time, and it should be sort of a seamless we're hoping to make it as seamless of a transition as possible, where you just find yourself using Scene Manager and Scene nodes more and more in your projects as the capabilities are there. And for instance, one of the things we did in this release was made it possible to drag and drop objects directly from the classic C4D object manager into the Scene Manager, so you can very easily bring them into the node context.
Let's see. Follow-up question. Well, another question. Well, somebody says, has Houdini integration stopped? I'm not even sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I do. And actually, it's something that I guess we neglected to message. But yes, we have stopped our Houdini engine implementation simply because it wasn't being used a whole lot. And we found that most people were making use of Olympics to transfer back and forth. We are very committed still to ensuring that the applications talk together. We're just using Alembic as the method for that, and of course, Redshift has great integration with Houdini, and of course with Cinema 4D, and so we can also use Redshift proxies to send information back and forth as well.
So for clarity, there was a sort of a bridge where I think you could make like a Houdini rig and then kind of mechanically bring that into Cinema, and that's not being supported anymore in the future because there's
you
workflows.
Can think of it very much like a wrapped up Scene nodes asset capsule, like many of the assets that we're delivering in S24. But it fundamentally, it was incredibly difficult because we had different release cycles to keep things in sync properly. And that was a lot of what it all came down to.
Excellent. Let's see. Is Espresso functionality going to come into the new node system, like dropping objects into Espresso as controllers? I mean, I guess isn't that kind of the way it already is?
Well, so an important thing to understand that's different between the Espresso system and the Scene node system is that the Espresso system is fundamentally just it's linked. The object manager is where the objects live, and the Espresso system is just linking to it. So you can add the same object into an Espresso layout as many times as you want. You're just linking to the object as it exists in the object system. But in the Scene node system, the node tree itself is the object system. So an object can really only exist in that node tree once. We do have the ability to create instances and things like that, but a single instance of an object can only be in the node tree once. So it's a little bit different concept, but we do hope to enable expressions through the system over time. Of course, you need to be able to support expressions, and you can do some of it already depending on, what you're trying to accomplish. But we'll continue to make that easier. Certainly I love the set driver, set driven workflows that you get with Espresso. And that's something that we'll be looking to bring over into the C node system in time.
Excellent. Moving on to a assets browser question. The new assets browser, which is pretty sweet. I really do like it a lot. Like, organizational tools tend not to be something that I pay much attention to. Like, I very rarely use the layer manager. I never really got into the take system. But this asset browser is definitely quick and intuitive. Now, the specific question here, I don't know the answer to. It is a question of if you could take the old content browser and if they had a favorites folder, if it's possible to transfer that over. I know we could take like a library file.
Favorites.
Yeah. Because we could take any existing one.
Not favorites, but if you go to a specific library file of object or materials. Now, this presets are not yet supported by the asset browser. We'll be adding that with time. But if you have a library file with objects or materials, you can simply right-click and choose Convert to Assets. Choose where you want to put them and hit OK, and it'll actually copy those over. And now we can see them here in this converted group. This is a complete guess, but would it be possible to make in the old content browser, make a folder, select everything in your favorites, drag it into the folder to kind of make it real, and then transfer that? I'm not sure because I can't remember. I don't ever really use the favorites in the old content browser. Add the favorites.
Leo's asking, does it copy or reference the lib files? And I think it actually copies it over. It's not dependent on the library file at all.
No, yeah, it doesn't depend on the library file at all. It's copying the files out of the library file into the assets database structure.
Yep, just want to interject that one. So, yeah, is it possible to drag favorites into its own folder?
Yeah, let's see here. Create new folder. Oh, it puts it there. Hang on. Create new. Well, actually, we do a new library. No.
Could you right-click and copy? Is that a thing?
Well, that was weird. It flashed like it was going to do it, then it didn't.
Aw, too bad. Well, yeah, I'm the king of workarounds, so just trying to find any way that might work. Oh, well, we tried. So...
But really, you might as well bring over all your presets, you know?
Yeah. Well,
set up new
so
favorites
quick.
in the asset browser.
Yeah, it's so quick to do. It would not take much time.
And one of the really cool things, actually, I'll mention while we're on the asset browser is the smart search capability. I know you showed this a little bit, Chris, but one thing that it has too is this dependency option. So we can go to dependency and we can type dependency redshift, for instance, and you can see now I'm getting all of the materials that include redshift. And we even, with Redshift, have an extra little flag there on the material so that you can easily spot those. You'll see that the dependencies here are specified on this tab of the info. So you can see all of the textures involved. You can see that this is using Expresso because the Redshift Expresso interface was used to create this Redshift material. And then we have the Redshift plugin. And so we can create a smart search that says something like dependency redshift metal, and then we can save that as a smart search. And then when we go back out here, you can see I've already done it, but we'll always have a Redshift metal folder, and that's always going to include anything with a metal keyword that uses Redshift as a plugin. And that's not limited to Redshift. Any of the plugins will support that. They won't have the flag on the material, but they'll support the ability to monitor the dependencies and search by them.
That's a cool one. I didn't think about that specifically, but that's neat. Another assets browser question. Question about the thumbnails. If they're bringing something from the content browser, will it bring... Wait, no, did that change? The thumbnails already installed. Expanding the library more in the future. I'm not, that kind of feels like a hybrid question, but well, essentially the thumbnails will come over from, if you have a custom thumbnail in the content browser, when you bring it to the asset browser, it'll bring that custom thumbnail, which is really handy. And once it's brought into whatever you bring into the asset browser, it's just an open folder, and you could add things, subtract things, move them into any other folder you want to. So it's a completely open system as it's set up right now.
Yeah, the great thing is that the hierarchy here is totally it's not a file hierarchy, it's a database hierarchy. So you can move these things wherever you want, and it's not like you're moving them in a file structure, you're just moving like where the address of them is in the tree. And you can mix and match from multiple databases into a single tree if you want. So it really helps you to be able to keep things organized. Where did the databases link in the preferences show up? Not sure about that question, but if we go in here to the into the preferences, there's an asset browser folder. Any assets that you download are going to go into this cache file that's here, and you'll notice this is outside of the application specific or the version specific cache, because we want you to be able to download these assets once, and if you have them downloaded, and you upgrade, not necessarily have to download them again. Of course, we know that it's important to be able to free up your space, so we've got a button here to easily clear all the downloaded assets, and you can do that on an asset by asset basis too within the browser.
So here's a good question while you're in this menu. Let's say that you had multiple people working on a project. You've got your entire studio. Would it be possible to link to a database folder on, say, a Dropbox, and everybody could be linked to that, and like adding their, the new materials they make to it and whatnot?
A shared network folder should work fine. At this point, we're not really recommending a Dropbox, because if multiple people are writing into the same library and it's syncing constantly, you could run into some sync errors. That's an area that we'd like to improve in the future. But in the meantime, another option would be for each person on the project to have their own asset browser library. And like I said, the tree structures can intermingle. So if each person in the project has their own database that they're working on, and they only save assets into their database, then you could share those, I think, through Dropbox without a problem.
I see. So I could have the Chris folder, the Chris database. You could have the Rick database, and I'm only ever saving to Chris, so we won't have an accidental conflict as both sync.
Right.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. That's a good way to do it right now.
I will caveat that I haven't tested it. I am working from home, and so I don't have all of the computers of the office that I normally do, and all of the people in the office is as easily accessible to test some of those wider networking type of scenarios. But yeah, you can link as many folders for databases here as you want. Folders can be zipped up, and the zip file can be linked directly. And then there's also the ability to add a URL. We're not really exposing yet the way for everybody to create an online library, just because we're still working out that functionality. But if, for instance, Cineversity were to come out with a library, you could link their URL in here and easily access all of their assets through this as well.
A follow-up from Demi, and they are asking, essentially, are the assets that are coming default with Maxon, are those locked in, or would there be possible room for expansion where on Maxon's end they change what's included?
There's very much room for expansion. The beauty of this system is that it is all hosted through, a server online, and so we can continue to build into the system anytime we want. We're not limited to pulling together these, large monolithic 10 gigabyte content browser libraries and making you download the whole thing anytime we want to tweak an asset or add additional assets. And again, before the lib4d files define the structure, now the structure is completely independent of the assets that are being provided themselves. So it's very easy for us to add assets at any time. And I would very much suspect that you'll see those as an ongoing subscriber benefit.
Nice. Just to expand on what you were saying, and I don't have a specific plan to do this, but in theory, I could I could on like the Rocket Lasso like web hosting server, I could create a database and then I could give everybody a URL to that database. And if I created a model and then added it to that folder, then people would see that update the next time they went into their version of the folder, like without having to do any updating. As soon as I click the folder, it'll ping my website and it would show any new options. It'll show the preview. And if they click to download, it'll pull it off my server and then now exist on your computer.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, that's functionality that we're probably going to be limiting initially to some, specific partners or even internally, like with Cineversity. But it is a possibility and something that I would expect that will be opening up wider down the road.
That will be cool. Let's see. Questions coming in all over the place.
There's a question about whether Maxon assets support other renderers or just the default. Currently, all of the materials that are built in are for the physical or standard renderer. I'm sure you can imagine that more Redshift materials will be added in due course. And as I showed, certainly Redshift materials are supported and you can search by them. They're just not provided in the Maxon built-in library. And all the other renderers, it would be the same thing. You can search by the dependency for that renderer. And, so you can certainly catalog your own materials for those renderers in the asset browser.
I suppose people could go to like anybody who owns an Octane library of I know I don't really use much Octane, but isn't there like on their website they have an official place with all the Octane materials? I guess if enough people bug them, they might be okay. We'll make the database version, and that could potentially appear if you put the URL in, but that doesn't exist now.
Yeah, I mean, these Redshift ones that I showed are actually from Pixel Lab. Most of them. I downloaded a few of their free libraries that they offer and just brought them in and incorporated them into my preset library. So these aren't part of the official distribution. These are just my local asset library.
A question of, can we have the icon of the renderer, Arnold or Chrono or Octane, at the icon of the file? I'm not sure if they're asking, because right now you have those little Redshift icons denoting them. So I think you just said that they couldn't they're only built in if it's Redshift. An alternative way to interpret that question would be, could you render preview thumbnails in different renderers? And yes, you totally could. You can render any thumbnail you want for these just by rendering anything in the picture viewer. You right click, copy it, and then you paste it in directly in as the thumbnail's icon. And there's a request for an astronaut model.
And I'm actually not sure if that ability to add the flag as part of the API or not. It may be possible for third parties to add those flags. I just know that we've built it in for Redshift because obviously they're part of the Maxon family. And yes, I've already asked our asset team to work on an astronaut asset. I know there's a huge demand for that. So hopefully soon we'll be able to add that into the library.
As a follow-up, they're saying they want to know if they want to know what renderer the file was using. So while it won't show it in the icon, if you click on the dependencies, that would show which it was using. Where there you can see it's saying it's using Redshift. So you could just click on, if you had a different material library and there's Octane, you click on that. This would now say like octane.c4d.
Yeah, exactly. And, there was a question about modifying the metadata, I think. It already scrolled past. But yes, the metadata itself is generally kind of built in. And you do have information about like what version of material was created with, or in the case of objects, you'll see the number of points, polygons, and objects associated with the asset. But the keywords, you can actually go in and add these even on our own, even on Maxon provided assets. So if we go to, I don't know, one of these, let's say this blue glossy, and we want that to show up as a car paint, we can search for car paint, and you can see that we already have a provided keyword for car paint, but you could create your own. Just hit plus. And now you can see that these two keywords are locked. Those are keywords we're providing, but you can add as many additional keywords onto assets as you'd like.
Yep, which is really quick to do. You can do it on multiple objects at the same time, making it really quick to add them kind of as a big cluster. Let's see. There's questions, but I'm scrolling through to find them.
A question about what the asset structure looks like on the hard drive. Let me see if I can pull this up without revealing anything I'm not supposed to.
Just doing the other monitor until you're ready.
Yeah. You've been doing a good job the last couple of weeks, too, avoiding showing anything, Chris.
It's very dangerous. I've had a couple calls with Rick where I was asking very specific questions about S24. And the same software I use to record just my screen normally is the same software that I would stream out to the world. And it's always dangerous to not click the stream button when we're like talking about NDA stuff, but also hiding all the folders and everything while I've been working on my videos and presentations.
Yeah, so this is basically what it looks like. It's really not human readable, but you can see that there's like a database info folder. And then these are some of the categories that have been included in this particular asset library. And then you've got all of the individual files, and then keywords, and then the smart search that I added for Redshift materials. And inside here, there's, a structure. These are mostly like JSON files or plain text files. The format was basically created and optimized in order to make the search happen really fast. I mean, as you've seen, it's super fast to search the assets, even if they're on our website and not actually downloaded to you yet.
I had seen a question of, is it even, let's say somebody was going to be working offline for a while and they just wanted to download everything. Is there a quick way to do that, or would you kind of go folder by folder, select all, and say download?
I think you pretty much have to go folder by folder, select all, and download like that. It is a multi-threaded download. I mean, you saw that's just material, so they came down pretty quick, but they do actually come down pretty quickly. I know that speeds may not have been super fast, yesterday, but you've got to consider that everybody was playing with it all at the same time. So it may have been slower than we would expect them to be ongoing.
Sure. And I mean, there is gigs and gigs of material in there already right now. Let's see. I think we spent some time. Is there anything else we want to show off in the asset browser while we're here? Otherwise, we'll move on to another topic. Because there's a lot of things, like just dragging objects in.
Yep.
Is really quick.
I mean, just the other thing I'll mention is that you do have the ability to choose when you add objects in, whether you want to save them as objects, bring them in as objects instances, render instances, or XREFs. The XREF option makes it real easy to swap out different assets or different versions of assets. And then one other comment, because I know it's sometimes a concern for people, we've adapted the Save Project with Assets command. There's this cogwheel here. And you see it's got copy file assets to the texture folder and copy node assets to the scene database. So any of those assets will automatically be included in either the texture folder, or in the case of a node asset, it just gets embedded directly into the scene. So you don't have to worry about losing that asset as you move portably between computers or send the file off to a render farm or something like that.
Let's see. There's another question here. Does converting, let's say you had a Redshift material, or let's say you had a Redshift material stored somewhere, and then you say, okay, save this into the assets browser. Is it going to be creating a copy of any like attached dependencies?
I'm not 100% sure on that, but I believe it's got smart dependency tracking, so that as long as you're storing it in the same library and it's using the same core image, it'll only store that once.
Potentially, even if you look in your texture file paths, as long as it's one of those, maybe it would be like, oh, it's already included. I'm not sure though.
Yeah, although it's a very, like, even the paths themselves come through with kind of a they're modified. Let's see, let's add this into the scene real quick. It's over here. So you can see that it's asset : // file, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
.jpg. But the good news is that it knows exactly what asset that is. And so, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's smartly, like if I was to make a copy of this, I guess we can try it. And drag that in. So now we have that there, and this here, and let's see, just to make sure we're grabbing the asset version of it, I'll bring it back in, and asset 93760E6, asset 93760E6. Yeah, so it looks like it's smart enough to determine that those are the same. And,
Okay, so it's just linking and not copying in this case.
Yeah.
As a quick question, Demi's saying, are those green Cinema 4D icons things we're not supposed to see? But I can report that those are just like non-release versions of Cinema. So those are like beta builds from like a slightly older version of probably S24.
Yeah, none of them will show you anything that at this point. None of the ones on my toolbar are ones that will show you anything you're not supposed to see.
So you can't misclick and accidentally show like
right.
Like a Cinema 4D version 50.
I do have a build here that's the working service pack build. Of course, the work doesn't stop when we ship. We continue to work on fixing bugs, and so there's probably a fair number of bugs that we've already fixed, and so I had the first service pack builds. That's what this green icon is.
Small change of topic here. There's a small conversation going on about UDIMs or UDIMs, and one person says, "What is a UDIM?" And is there any changes to that in S24?
Yeah, nothing in S24. We know that's a hot request. A UDIM basically is being able to separate the UVs for a single object onto multiple UV tiles so that you can make better use of your texture resolution. And we understand the need for them. We understand the request. It's something that it affects a whole lot of the of Cinema 4D. Really, it's not just the UV editor itself. It's the packing algorithms. Redshift already has some support for UDIMs, but we'd want to make sure that we have good support there. The classic renderers, body paint. The baking algorithms. So it's a pretty extensive task. It's definitely something that's on our radar, something that we know we need to tackle. It's just not something that we've gotten to yet. Now, what we did add in R23, and I think there was some mention of that in the chat, is the ability to pack multiple objects into a single UV tile, which is kind of the opposite workflow. It's a workflow that's used a lot in games so that you can minimize the number of textures that you have to deliver with the game. And so you do have the ability now to select multiple objects and the UV islands on those objects and pack those all into a single UV tile.
Excellent. I like this question. What was the last feature that you managed to squeeze in this release?
The last major feature, I will tell you that the dynamic placement was something that we were not sure we were going to be able to pull off. And the team on that just really knocked it out of the park. You wouldn't know it by how polished the feature is. So that's probably the main one. As far as the last sort of things that snuck into the app, that would have been some of the assets with the scene manager system. The beauty of that system is that the scene node system itself can be used to create something that looks like a feature, but is completely constructed with nodes. So I'm sure we'll get into it soon. But the scene manager, when you talk about things like the greeble and the dual mesh and the select facing and the 7-segment display, those are actually all assets that I constructed myself in nodes and didn't need a programmer, just got them integrated right into the app and kind of snuck them in right under the radar. So yeah, those were kind of the last things to actually go into the app.
Demi, going back, as we already talked about the dynamic placement tool, what Well, they're asking if there's some sort of cheat to keep it fast, but essentially there's a new algorithm that Maxon made that does put like a low poly proxy around everything, but there's a slider to increase your accuracy. So you can crank it way up and get it incredibly accurate on the overall object. So I think it's within the tolerance of like really tiny objects. So I think that yes, it is a lower poly approximation, but it's going to be within the acceptable, use case for pretty much anything. But let's see. I think I would personally like to move on over into the scene manager and the new scene nodes. There was a question earlier about are these considered production ready? And no, not quite yet. It's still ongoing, but they're more useful. And did anything, actually, here's my question is, one of the dangers as something is a tech demo and not quite production ready is that things you make might break moving forward is one of the bigger dangers. Did anything specifically break between versions?
Yeah, there were a few things, and it did factor into our decision making. We usually try to keep the file format as stable as possible. We can open Cinema 4D files all the way back to R12 with no problem. But because this was a technical preview, there were some things that it would have taken, a week or two to make the adaptations to ensure that the 23 scenes would come into 24 properly, and we just chose not to do those. I think that you will see things stabilize from here on out, in part because we've started creating a lot of assets out of the scene node system, and we're not going to want to redo all that work. So yeah, I think there is still the potential for that, but I think you'll see things be a lot more stable from here on out. It is still a technical preview, though, and really that's largely to communicate that we understand that the workflow and capabilities of the scene node and scene manager are not up to the Cinema 4D standard yet. We definitely think they're coming along great, and that there is the potential to start using this functionality in your scenes. But we want to ensure that that we know that we're not there yet. And so we're continuing to iterate on it with each release. As we committed, right up front, that we would be doing this sort of in public with you, getting your feedback all along the way, because we know how important workflow is to the C4D user, and we want to make sure we get this right.
Exactly. But since we've still got your screen up, what I would love to see as a specific demo, because I don't think this has been covered yet anywhere publicly, but did you say you made the dual mesh setup? So what I would love to see is a demo of the scene manager and the dual mesh, but then kind of making the dual mesh or something equivalent from scratch, and how the two kind of tie together, and you could kind of take something, wrap it up, and then make it available.
Sure. So let's start from scratch, and just to make it a little extra fun, let's grab a classic Cinema 4D object as our starting point. I'm going to pop open the scene manager here. Normally that's right up here. I just happen to have it docked in my layout. And like I said, you can bring a classic object into the scene manager now simply by dragging and dropping. And then we can start to add modifiers. We have a modifier stack here onto all of our objects. And this is kind of mirroring the idea of deformers in classic Cinema 4D, but we can do so much more with it now because we've got these modeling and selection modifiers. So if we go into something like the dual mesh, and double clicking here brings up the asset browser so that we can really easily find all of our node-based assets. We haven't integrated these yet into any of the palettes, but you can access everything through the asset browser. And the bonus is that, again, because they're part of the asset browser, we can deliver this functionality independent of a C4D release if we choose to. And also, other users down the road, TD level users, can create this type of functionality and share it as well. So you essentially get plugins without the sort of overhead of a plugin. So we take the dual mesh modifier here, and we'll just drag it right on top. And I'll hide the classic Cinema 4D Platonic so that we don't see that. And you see that we get sort of this hollowed out version of this. And we can continue to play with the classic Cinema 4D implementation here, or the classic Cinema 4D object. But then we can also do things back here in the scene manager. So we can add additional modifiers like subdivide, can drop that in right before the dual mesh modifier, and we can subdivide that. We can adjust the subdivision strength. We can also drop that subdivide on the other side and smooth subdivide the final result. And we can add selection modifiers before we do all of those things. So if I grab like a select facing, this selects all the polygons that are facing in a specific direction. And this one can get a little bit wonky with the dual mesh modifier, but if we set, say for instance, +Y, you can see that we're able to isolate the polygons on the top of that platonic. We can choose and opposite, start to get some really interesting kind of looking shapes. And this dual mesh modifier itself has lots of options to control the extrusion and the amount of inset, the variation, and we can also turn off the hollow mode, and we get something that's just sort of like scaly as well.
Would you mind popping open the assets browser so we can see the node layout? Because right now you're pulling up a quick menu, so you could search. If you know what you're looking for, you can find it very quickly.
Oh, and I see what you're saying. Yeah, if you pull it up in here, and we go into operators, here you'll see all the things that you can make use of in the scene manager. And so if we go in here to geometry modifier, here you can see all of these operators right here.
You don't need to know it beforehand. Like, they all exist here in this folder.
Right. And the nice thing too is that anytime somebody creates an asset, like the dual mesh modifier is what we call a geometry modifier or modeling op. And anytime somebody creates an asset with that, it automatically gets added into, you can see what we're creating here is actually a modeling op. And we can choose to apply a different modeling op just by doing this drop down here. So you don't have to like delete your dual mesh and change it to agreeable if you change your mind. You can just choose the drop down and change between which operations being applied.
Yep, they can transform into each other. Let's say a question of, okay, you're in the scene manager here and essentially using the new scene nodes, and you're creating new geometry from this. As a general rule, the way it's integrated is this is the last step. This is the final thing that's happening. So anything you create there, it is kind of real. It is there in the scene, but you couldn't clone onto the surface of that with a vanilla cinema cloner. Like that came before. So this is the last step that happens. With that in mind, with this geometry, would you be able to just apply an Octane material and render it out in Octane?
Sure, you should be able to. Yeah, I mean, any material basically. I will. Let's just do a redshift material, just because that's a little bit more interesting, and we'll just set this to aluminum, for instance, and I just drag it here onto the scene manager. You can see I get a material flag there, and then when I start rendering, there's our aluminum. And also here in the scene manager, get the asset browser out of the way there. Another key point here is that we can tag specific modifiers in the modifier stack. So, in this case, the dual mesh and the material op are probably the things that we're going to want to modify the most. And so we can tag those, then we can collapse this modifier stack and not worry about it anymore. So we can just click on the specific tags, and you can see that we can select these and easily change them down here in the attribute manager.
I can hear your machine revving up. live streaming and rendering.
Redshift on a laptop.
Yep.
In a garage without air conditioning.
Yep. So as far as building some sort of, like you've got this dual mesh, but as far as building something like this from scratch, how would you go about doing something like that? Because this is where I think things get really exciting.
Yeah, so first of all, any of the assets that we provide, you can't, first of all, we're creating a node tree in the background, which is awesome. The whole time you're working in the scene manager, everything you're doing is reflected in nodes. So if you need to jump to nodes at some point to create some sort of a complex relationship or expression, you can easily do that. But basically, when we do this with the scene manager, it's automatically, again, applying that modeling op instance of the dual mesh modifier. But if I search for dual mesh modifier and pull it in here, you can see that we have the option. Now we're getting sort of the elemental node rather than the modeling op. And you can go into these assets and hit edit asset, and that'll actually pull up all of my messy work here. So you can see basically what we're doing. This is an instance of the geometry modifier group. So anytime you want to create an asset like this, you start from this asset construction area, and you start from one of the templates based on what you want to create. So you can create an effector group, a field group, a geometry modifier group. You can create a selection modifier group, a primitive group if you're creating a primitive object, or an operator group, and that's kind of like a catch-all modifier that will go on the modifier stack. You saw Chris do that in his video. So basically, when you create a geometry modifier group, you get a geometry in and a geometry out, and everything else that happens inside is up to you. So what I'm doing here is triangulating the geometry, and then I am switch is basically just choosing one or the other based on an input. So this is whether dual mesh is on or off. So if the dual mesh option's on, we're going to triangulate, otherwise we're not. And then after we do that, we subdivide, and then we melt, and then we inset, and then we delete, and then we extrude, and then we set a selection, and then we connect that. This here is basically, this top area is basically grabbing everything that isn't selected and carrying that through to the end. And then the bottom here is doing the sort of hollow out functionality. So we do all of these things, again, just using those basic modeling nodes. And these are the same nodes that you have used in Classic Cinema 4D interactively. We've just made them procedural. And you're then able to kick out the geometry, and you save that out as an asset. And, of course, I've exposed some various parameters that users might want to change. And that's really all there is to it. I mean, I'm sure I'm oversimplifying it, but, this one is not an incredibly complex asset.
But that's kind of the point, right?
Right.
It didn't take that many nodes, and you suddenly get this really cool look from your model. So
Right.
a user's ability to throw together a series of these to do very specific things. Like, for instance, there's the ability to, as a simple thing, like selections are really important. And there's you can create a random selection of points or polygons. But all the time, what I want is to feed in a piece of geometry, and I don't want just a random selection. I want it to output one geometry that's one half and the other geometry that's the other half. So I very quickly combined like 5 nodes. It's not that complicated. And then I saved that out as its own node. And now I have a geometry in, and it spits 2 different geometries out. And that is going to save me so much time as I use it over and over and over again. So I think the things that combine just a handful of nodes will happen way more often than something very complex happens.
Yeah, and I'll give you some previews of a few of the other assets that I've been working on that may come out in the future. We've got this toy brick, which is fun. So actually, this is not built into an asset yet, but we can go in here to the node editor, and you can see that you can easily choose the number of pips in the X or the Y, and then the height of the brick, and adjust sort of the height of the pips. Nice. I've chosen the defaults here very specifically, as you can see.
Mega blocks, right?
But yeah, I mean, you go in here and you can see that this is where things start to get more complex. So here I'm basically taking the pips X and the pips Y that are provided, and I'm doing a range. So I'm saying loop this many times and feeding that into this group that generates a single pip. And when we go in here, this is really complex. But what I'm doing in here actually is creating every single point and every single polygon for 1 pip. And then I loop over how many that you've asked for on the X or the Y. and then connect them all together and add a chamfer onto them. That sort of, from the dual mesh, which is actually fairly simple and easy to understand, to sort of the depth of the system and what you can achieve there. I'll show one more here.
Quick question in here. MXS is asking about Redshift in nodes, but I think Redshift is one of the things that's been most integrated into nodes for a while. There's the material node space and the scene node space. So everything you do in kind of the espresso type interface with Redshift, it can be done in the material node version.
Yeah, and there are some limitations to what's available in the Redshift node space. You can choose to use nodes for materials. I know you've shown this in your previous shows, Chris, but you can use the node system here to build out your Redshift materials. There are a few limitations versus the Espresso implementation, and we're working to plug all those holes. But there's also some advantages that you get in the node space that you don't get in Espresso. And one of the main ones is you get a much nicer material preview because the node system sort of supports delivering that nicer material preview to the viewport.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, somebody says, will it break if they switch between them? I'm not sure what switch between them. Is there like a button to convert a Redshift node into a scene node? I've never done that specifically. I've always built them from scratch.
Here, convert all materials to nodes, or convert and replace all so this one is nodes. So I'm pretty sure you can go both ways. You may only be able to go into nodes. And, again, if one of those unsupported things, you hit it, then, yeah, you could break the material. But, you can always undo and go back. So if things are supported, and you can mix and match, just change this parameter. You can even pop that out and have it be a toggle in your interface. And then you can easily switch between using an Espresso-based material or a node-based material. So you can get that nicer viewport preview if all of the things you need are supported in nodes.
Interesting. Okay, well, anyway, back to scene nodes. Well, Dan's asking if it's possible to bring in user data. So I'll make it more specific. So if you had, like before you were taking in a regular vanilla or a classic cinema object, if that object had user data, would that come into the scene nodes, or is that completely separate?
Yes. So that's one thing we added in 24 is the ability, and let's go back to here. And we'll just add some user data onto this Platonic. I don't know. Dual mesh. 0 to 100%, whatever. And then go into the node editor. And if we go here and choose update parameter ports, we should be able to right click here, and we may need to, let's try re-adding it. There it is. So we have the dual mesh parameter here from the user data, and we could use that to feed into, oops, I got two of them in there. And we can use that to feed into, for instance, this dual mesh in the inset variation. Let's do that because that's a percentage, and I set up a percentage. And so now, I can set this to, you can see that that's modifying the inset variation there. The important thing to remember is that you can only feed user data from Classic Cinema 4D into the node system because, again, the node system happens at the end of the chain.
Yeah, it only flows one way.
Yeah. And then, just in case the question was about the Redshift nodes, let's see, back to this one. That has been a question in the past, but it was added fairly early on, several versions ago, the ability to pull in the color user data, integer user data, scalar user data, vector user data. So you can, for instance, pull in the color user data and link it to the MoGraph color or the object color. And those will actually come over from the node system too, if, say, you're using a distribution.
Oh, nice. So yeah, even some of the new things sneaking in there. And so that was, but on the previous question, so the user data came in, but in general, the C nodes, they have kind of their own new user data. I'm not sure specifically what they're called, but you can propagate any port you want up to a higher level and just create new incoming data. So any object you select, you select the node and that information will just pop up as the important parameters. Because obviously when you connect dozens of nodes together, there's hundreds of potential parameters, but you only have 5 you actually want the user to control. And those can all be created just like user data. It's a little complex right now, but I'm starting to get used to it.
Yeah, and we do have like a resource editor where you can go in and dial in all the parameters. It's kind of an extension on what you guys are used to from user data. It is more complex, but we'll be working on continuing to document and improve the interface of this too. But this is also sort of the nitty gritty for the asset creators. It's not something that most users are going to have to deal with.
That's true. When you're just dragging in different scene nodes into the scene manager, then like none of that's even close to it, something to worry about.
Right.
But anyway, some of your assets.
Oh, question I see here from Joel. Can you bake nodes and use it as a point cache or an Alembic? Nodes do support Alembic and FBX, so you can export to Alembic in the case of a point cache. The other thing you can do is there's a command here in the edit menu of the nodes, current scene state to classic. And if you click that, what it's going to do is actually create a classic representation of the geometry that you created in scene nodes. So here, if I take that out, and I'll just bypass the scene node system. Let's just make sure it's out of there. Kill this. And so now you can see here I have a classic Cinema 4D piece of geometry. Actually, it's showing the instance. So, but yeah, so there is that capability to bake out the geometry and make use of it in classic Cinema 4D.
Well, that's nice, because before you had to like bake as Alembic and then reopen up the file. Now there's a one-click solution to be like, okay, I've made something in the new stuff, but let's bring it back into classic.
Yeah, we decided not to make it hard on people. It is kind of a little bit of a funky hierarchy, but this gives you some insight in how the scene node system interacts with the classic Cinema 4D viewport and with the renderers, basically writing out multi-instances and geometry in the background.
Can you zoom in on the brick and show polys? Somebody wants to see your polys.
See how good my geometry creation is.
But yeah, you said you're doing a lot of this from like the point level. So this isn't like you made a cube and some cylinders and a bool. Like you created the geometry from the raw math.
Yeah. If we go in here, you can see that for a single pip here, let's see if I can make sense of this for you. Like see here, these groups here, I'm generating the pip top. And so if we go in here, this is, looping over the circle. And this is basically just basic math to create points around a radius of a circle. And I build out an array of those points. And then I feed that out into the array of the object. And I do the same thing with the pip bottom. So that's the first ring, and then the second ring. And then the box inner is this next ring. And then I've got the box outer, and then I've got the bottoms, which depending on whether you're on one of the edges or not, I extrude that out basically. So it really is getting into the nitty gritty of actually defining the points and then the point indexes for each of the polygons.
Right. Well, ultimately, that's going to be the fastest that Cinema could possibly calculate this object. But a user, 99.5% of users will never, ever have to go this deep on something.
No.
They truly would make a series of cylinders and Boolean it out from a cube and whatnot. So, things would get combined that way. But when if especially from Maxon, going deeper and actually building it from the raw points is going to be the fastest, ultimate way for it to get presented to the user.
Yeah. And a few things that are really helpful that we've added here in S24 are this port inspector, which allows you to pull out this sort of attached value inspector for any port. And, you can also click any port, and you've got this little HUD here that tells you the value and the type of data. But then really cool is the data inspector. So you can pull this out, and any of those aspects of this that I was kind of just going over, often it's incredibly helpful to be able to see, like, what are the points I'm dealing with here. And so you can see for each of those iterations what points are being created, and this is the actual array of points in this is the pips in one direction and the pips in the other direction, I think, and then all of the points in that specific pip.
Yep. Yeah, but it's pretty much impossible to do anything advanced in scene nodes without this data inspector, because you just have no idea what's happening behind the scenes. You're like, well, it's not working. I'm not sure why. You suddenly see this list, and you're like, oh, my array is one too short, and then you can fix it. So very, very important.
Yeah, people are complaining about my topology, as I figured they would. A lot of that, honestly, is just the chamfer itself. So if I pull that out, and just go straight here, and then drop this in, and let's get rid of that version because that's confusing.
Oh yeah, you broke the scene root.
Yep. You should see it here. Oh, I bypassed that too. There we go. So this
there you go.
This is the basic geometry you're creating, or I'm creating in this particular asset. And again, partly this asset does need some work still, which is one of the reasons why it's not integrated. I just thought I'd open it as a fun little example.
Yep. And that's, the math of the raw points.
So then we chamfer it, basically, and that's where we lose some of where the topology goes a little off, and then we subdivide.
Nice. Did you have any other objects?
Well, I briefly showed this diamond gem.
Yeah, that's why I was referencing.
A very similar construction here, using, again, sort of radial point layout, and then just kind of drawing the right point indexes to get the polygons for each of the facets. And just feeding it right in to a primitive group in this case. So once I make this an asset, it'll show up as a primitive, and I can create a cube and then change it into a diamond. I wish it was that easy in real life. And one other one that I've been playing with, because I've been having fun with the OSL functions that have been added to Redshift. I have been working on, see if I can find it here in my folders. I have been working on this, which is kind of a combo of nodes and, actually, is that the right version? Let's see here. Lost something here. Extrude. Well, this was working. Let's see. Maybe it just doesn't work in that version. We'll open the super secret version. Okay. Something's changed. But I created an asset here for splitting the selection. So basically, it takes all of the polygons that are selected and turns them into individual objects, because that's what's needed by this window box OSL that was making the rounds a while ago. Which allows you to create a texture based on sort of the camera position to the object. So you can use material-based
room interiors.
Right. Yeah. So you can go in and there's, you You can buy some of these, or there's some free ones that you can make use of. Let's see here. Nope, it's yeah, it is. So we can grab like a generic office, and now you can see that we've got that office in all of those windows. And of course, this is just a basic building, but again, I've constructed this a lot like what Chris showed in his presentation yesterday. I'm just taking a plane and extruding it, selecting the facing, so I get the top and bottom, inverting the selection, insetting it, extruding it in a little bit, and then splitting all of those individual polys out into separate objects, so that the window box has unique axes for each of the windows. That's what it needs.
Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, I love that window box trick. Yeah,
super cool. I definitely want to continue playing with this and get it, into a much more nice looking demo. Make some more window box templates and whatnot. Maybe be able to vary the windows. Shouldn't be too hard. I just something I started working on yesterday.
Nice. Well, I mean, it is, once you start just playing with the nodes, it is pretty fun. It's a very different world than playing with the vanilla cinema like object manager, when it's really all about combining these higher level objects. But once you open up the nodes, you're kind of going deeper. And it does create new opportunities that you wouldn't even think about those types of things. But, at the same time, these are not trivial to use. So I think a lot of where you can see with the scene manager that a lot of where you guys are going with it is that people don't need to go deep into the nodes if they don't want to. They should still be able to create a cube quickly and then make it a child and apply material. And you never needed to go into the nodes to do that.
Right, exactly. It's our intention that, or our expectation, I guess I should say, that most users can just work in the scene manager, building these things out in a hierarchical way, much like they're used to already from Cinema 4D Classic. But, certainly there is the power of the nodes and being able to build those relationships in the background. And then there is the ability for, sort of more advanced TD level users to dive in and create assets for other people to use. And, this is the kind of thing that, I mean, first of all, in classic Cinema 4D, you couldn't really do these procedural geometry operations without a plugin. But even, as we look at how these assets are going to be packaged with additional functionality down the road, it's the kind of thing that you might have had a rig of, 10 objects in classic Cinema 4D that then all of those objects would be there all the time for the user to mess with and screw up the rig. And now you can package that all up into one nice object that looks like it's native to Cinema 4D. So, I'm really excited about the possibilities here.
Its own icon and everything.
Yeah.
Let's see. Demi, that seems like the kind of thing that maybe me and Casey could tackle next week. And then somebody's just asking, and I'm not sure how it would immediately go, but do you think it'd be possible to quickly make a couple of nodes that could select every other polygon? Because we could manually type it out with the indexes, but we could, there's got to be a way of easily like moduloing an arbitrary number.
Yeah, so let's add a plane and go into polygon mode. We did, by the way, also make it so that these objects can be moved in the viewport. I know that seems like a silly thing, but it definitely helps a lot with getting the Neutron workflow more generalized. But let's jump into the node editor here. And what I like to do is create another primitive and put that here. And I'm going to put that into the geometry input mode. And then basically I have geometry here and geometry there. So I can create a selection modifier group and put that in between. And then...
So you're interrupting the geometry flow, and
right.
You're going to do something to it.
And then if I connect these inside, you'll see that there's our plane again. And I'll just select it there so we can see what we're doing. So now we just need to add some sort of a selection to the geometry. So let's go ahead and let's do a, well, we could just do it by index. I mean, for starters, let's just do a loop selection just to show that. So we can do geometry in, geometry out, and we want to make sure that's in polygons. And we can set this to like edge point 1 would be like 15, and edge point 2 would be 16, let's say. And now you can see that we've got that loop. And so we could generate that 15 and 16, you know, in numerous different ways. And then, well, let's work off of this. So if we now want to get the selection, we can feed the geometry in there, and now we're going to get an array of indices. And so what we can do now is we can get the count of those indices, and we can iterate. Actually, we don't even need to get the count. We can do an index iterator through those indices, and we'll switch.
So that's now
let's do an if.
That's outputting like index 1, index 2, index 3, kind of each one in sequence. Everything that's part of that selection.
And so then we need to get the element from the array, right? So we'll pass the array in, and we'll get the element here from the index. And then what we want to do is, this is going to give us every one of them. So if we want to output just every other, let's say, we'll create a mod. So we'll modulo, and we'll say if that index, actually we'll grab it, if the index modulo, and this is an int, sorry, I'm working on top of myself here. We'll say if it's a modulo 2, then we're going to, actually, I think, so we need to append elements, because we're going to build a new array.
Yep.
And we'll just create a basic array with nothing in it. And I'm going to make that an integer. And I'm just going to remove all of the elements so that it's an empty array. Feed that in.
So that's an array, and an array is like a list of values. And in this case, you said, hey, this is going to be a list, but it's empty right now. But the list will all be filled with integers.
Yeah, and then actually, I think what I'm going to do, we'll do it this way. So we're getting the element, and we're finding out if the index itself is every other. And then
would that value have to come from the index iterator or from the actual indices?
I think you're right. It needs to come there. And then we need to decide if we're appending the value or not. So I think actually what we want to do is iterate. We don't want to iterate through every index. We want to modulo the indexes as we're iterating. So probably what we want to do is get count, and we'll divide that and that's going to give us the number of times that we're going to, this is like, if we're doing every other, we'll divide it by 2. And that's going to give us the number of times that we're going to, the number of selections we're going to run into, basically. Mm-hmm. And so then we'll do a range. And we want to go from 0 to that number. We're going to multiply that now.
Well, just for clarity, what the range is doing is it's going from 0 up to the point count that was divided by 2. So that's now
Right.
going to output like 0, 1, 2, 3. And if there's 100 points, this will go up to 50 because you divided it in two.
Right. And so this is basically creating a loop. Like in any programming language, it's a for loop basically from 0 to end. And each time we're outputting, we're going to output that value, and we're going to multiply it back by that same value. So just for actually, I'm going to propagate this. So let's just go ahead and propagate it.
Okay, so this is now how many indexes do we skip?
I'll just call it every n, and I'll feed that into the multiply as well.
So just for clarity, just as I said, that range is now outputting 0, 1, 2, 3, but now you're multiplying it. So now it's outputting 0, 2, 4, 8. So that is now every other number.
Right. And then we feed that into the get element, and we append that into our array. And you can see these little symbols here. That's letting us know we're kind of still inside of our loop here.
What's showing it's in the loop?
The little conversion symbol. That shows up really anytime you're converting. But in this case, it's telling me I'm still in my loop. And so now we will set selection. We feed that into our geometry, feed our geometry into this, and we feed our indices into there. And that should pretty much do it, I believe. So now, if I select this and do every n, and let's go into polygon mode. I apparently broke it somewhere. So now we get to use the debug tools.
Is your initial node set to polygon mode? Is that what we've been running in the whole time?
Yes. Well, here, the loop selection.
Yeah.
It's in polygon mode, yeah.
That's in polygon. But then you have get selection. Is get selection in polygon?
Set selection is in
Actually,
polygon.
we don't even want to be getting the loop selection anymore. Shouldn't we be bypassing that entirely?
Oh, this is in points.
Yeah,
there we go.
That's what I thought. I in the back of my head, I thought that we were still outside of it.
Although it's still not working. So
But this is all in the context of a loop selection, right? Do we want to get every other in its entirety? So we should bypass loop.
So this is our index get selection. Yeah, I mean this isn't. I could remove the loop. So.
And just for clarity, maybe select your geometry input in the scene manager. Is it going to be?
Oh yes. That still didn't do it though.
Okay, still didn't do it, but wait, a couple of different variables to keep in mind.
But now we're selecting nothing. So what we need to do is actually add a random selection to select all here as a starting point.
That's also probably in points.
Thank you. Helps to have someone watching. These are some things that we're looking to improve too, is what mode you're in and having that selection to start with. So here we've got basically every polygon. And then we're going to...
Suddenly it's selected. Is it working? Is that now selecting it properly? It's hard to tell because you're doing every other, which could create a pattern. I'm not sure.
We're looping through 200, and we had 400. So that part seems right. And then we are multiplying. So we've got 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc. And then we are building this array, and we'll do a data inspector there. 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc. So yeah, it may be.
Maybe you set n to 3.
Set it to 5.
No.
Let's just to make sure that it's not a display thing. I think it might be a little easier if we add an extrude in here. Nope, we're hitting all of them. I'm sure it's something very simple that we're doing here, Ron.
Yeah, no, yeah, we fixed everything that I thought to fix, so I'm not sure what to do now. And then I'm going to address Dean in the comments that, yes, in a way that something like Houdini or even Espresso, depending on what you're doing, everything can start feeling really complicated. But I think ultimately the point here is cinema's always been pretty much the most artist-friendly of all the major 3D applications. And that is Maxon's goal, to keep on doing that. So this is if you want to go deep. The idea here is it'll still have all the ease of use that you've always had. But if you want to start going really, if you want to zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, we can now go really, really deep on it and make changes. Your average user should never need to do that. But the TDs can go deeper and do that if they need to. And if and when we get this working, we can package this entire thing up, and then that is now just an asset that the artist could then use from that point on.
Yeah, I'm not sure, honestly, where this is.
Oh, wait, it looks like... Oh, Fritz is in the chat, and it's saying active selection.
Oh, thank you, Fritz.
Oh, it's set selection.
So set selection actually allows you to create a selection, the equivalent of a selection tag, so a name selection. But if I want to set the active selection, I would do it with the active selection, and it does pay to have some of your programmers in the chat watching you. And
we just had the wrong node.
Beautiful.
Ta-da.
And so
see, that's
now
simple.
We can go back to 2, and we get every other polygon, or 3, or 4, or 5, or 6. And again, you could combine that with, say, that loop selection. So, and let's do it outside of the asset, because then the asset is more it's more generic for future use. But we could, again, go back to like 15, 16 to create that loop. But then the problem is that we have all that select all. No, we don't.
Inside there, we have an equivalent of a select all, don't we?
No, not anymore. It's here.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. And then if we do 2, yeah, there we go.
Oh, yeah, okay. So it's every other of the active selection now.
Right. Yeah. So there you can go. We're selecting a loop, and we're getting every other within the selection. And then again, this is the beauty of it. I can convert this to an asset. I'll save that in my library, and this is for you, Dean. Select every n, and now let's go into a new scene even, and we'll create a plane, and we'll create a loop selection, and we'll select 14 to 16, and where did it go? Loop selection.
Didn't like that loop selection.
14 to 15. There we go. That's working. Okay. And then we will do a select every n. And we can drop that right over our loop selection. Then we'll do an extrude and drop that there.
And there you go.
And then we can go back to select every n, and we can change that. And we could even animate it.
Yeah.
So
well, and the point being is all that work had to be put in, but you've now made a new tool. And that new tool never needs to be made again. It can just be brought in. You could even probably modify it in such a way that it would appear in the list of selection tools.
Right. In fact, it will already. So if I just create a generic selection op. You can see this is a selection op. So if I decide, oh, select every n isn't what I wanted to do there, I want to do a random selection, I can choose random selection, put it in polygon mode, and now that's a random selection. And I change my mind again, I can go back to select every n. Because the assets are built from a specific template, you immediately have access to them within the operator level objects.
Yep. But there is also something, well, I mean, I just love making little tools and utilities, and obviously my entire job is making plugins. So the idea of making these little packaged up nodes, like it's really satisfying to be like, there, I've now got select every n, I made that and it's just going to work. And if in the future I need to go in and tweak it or add another feature, like you go inside and add an offset. So then it would like push each one forward by one, or an upper clamp, a lower clamp. There's so many extra settings that could be added in there, but you now have a select every n.
Yeah.
Now
and as much as Philippe and Fritz and some of the other programmers who are probably here in chat love to get my feature requests and your feature requests that I'm passing on and implement them, it's great that, we have the ability to, they're giving us the tools to build these things and create sort of this visual programming and plugins without, having that overhead of building an actual C++ plugin and having to distribute it, or wait for the next version of Cinema 4D.
Exactly. So all of this is getting built out and developed, and there's so many different things that could happen. I wouldn't be surprised to see a select every n appear in a future version of Cinema, because it's just a useful selection option to have. So they will just see more and more of that, as well as an interesting thing that's been in my head is that like different studios of people who are using it are going to end up getting more and more customized tools in a way that's never happened before in Cinema. Cinema, everything's pretty uniform, and then you have some plugins you can add on top. But now, like in-house, I could, if I was at a studio, I might be a TD and create a series of tools that are going to be a series of things that are geometry helpers, and those are just kind of in-house tools that just that place has. So it's going to be interesting to see how even that might segment a little bit.
Yeah, I do hope, though. I mean, one of the things that's great about the Cinema 4D community is how open and sharing it is. We don't have a lot of that proprietary nature that some of the other that comes along with some of the other applications. So, while certainly studios are welcome to create their own tool sets, I do hope that there's this opportunity to share, and we'll try to create ways to foster sharing of assets in the community so that. There's no use in everybody reinventing the wheel and everybody creating a select every n node and having to have Fritz bail them out on using active selection instead of set selection.
This is true. But here's here's a thing that's just in my head, and I guess it's going to be largely on Maxon to do this, but there's also got to be sort of a curation process as well, because if I make a whole bunch of selection tools and we have like select every n, but the way I do it, it's like, oh, well, mine is going to override the original selection, where somebody else makes a select every n, but it doesn't override the previous selection. And so if there isn't kind of like this set style guide, then we can end up with chaos of like, okay, here's 50 different versions of select every n, and every single one of them behaves a little bit differently. And so matching the Maxon style guide would be really important then.
Yeah, and that's something we're very aware of, and we'll be working on building that out as the system gets to maturity and sort of graduating out of technical preview. Our UX team is already working on a style guide in the background, and I'm probably blowing it everywhere when I create my assets, but fortunately I've got them to back me up, and as I make mistakes and we discover the things that we need to communicate to folks who are building assets, it'll give us an opportunity to share those things and get that style guide out to people.
Yep. Bobby is asking about when nodes were implemented, and the scene nodes were first implemented in R23, and then they were significantly improved now in R24, but it is an ongoing process.
Yep. One other thing I'll point out here with the scene manager is this concept of placeholder objects. So when we take some of the things that are like traditional generators from Cinema 4D.
Oh yeah, I didn't show this off at all. I actually completely forgot to show it in mine.
You see, like with a sweep, I know that people always, once you've done it a lot, you understand. But, if you just add a sweep object here in classic Cinema 4D, you don't know what you have to do to actually make something sweep. And then even once you know, oh, I need to put objects as a children, you don't always know which one is the profile and which one is the path. And so,
how many people don't even know about the rail concept about putting a
right.
third spline in?
And so what we've done here in the asset in the scene manager is made it possible for users to we've added these placeholders. So when you're creating the asset, you can specify that the object that will the object dragged here will be the profile. The object dragged here will be the path, and you can put a little text hint for people so that when they drag it in, they'll know. And so here I've got the atom array object. And you can see input objects. So I know that I can just drag something right on there and it'll create an atom array. And then much like our classic Cinema 4D atom array, you can go in here and, adjust the parameters. But again, this is where it's really cool. I had gotten a request from a user, if I make the rotation segments here 4, he wanted to be able to rotate or spin the atom array, basically.
Ooh, that's useful.
That's something that I would have had to, ask one of our programmers to build in classic Cinema 4D. But instead, one of our QA guys actually created the neutron atom array, or the scene manager version of the atom array, and he was able to just add a couple nodes to add this functionality in. So again, that's where the system all comes alive, the flexibility and the being able to react quickly to user requests and things like that. So the future here is really bright, once we get all the capabilities into the system and all of the workflow there.
Yeah, there's so many things I'm excited for in the future, and different parts of cinema that I can't wait until they get integrated. And I don't know anything about what's coming in the future for this specifically, but man, am I hoping for a unified dynamic system. Because there are so many cool things we can do with dynamics, but they don't necessarily all play together.
Well, I'll just say that that request has been, we have heard that request from a lot of users, and that's as far as I'll go on that for the moment.
Yeah. I know I wouldn't expect any official word, but let's see. Demi has a question. Is there a node for searching the existence of neighboring polygons to make polygon selection rules for labyrinths? I mean, there's just a straight up grow.
Yeah, but there's also a geometry neighbor node. And so with this, you can choose the neighbor to a point or an edge.
Yes.
And so you bring in the geometry and the index, and it'll give you the neighbors to that edge. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, Chris, there's the grow selection as well. Somewhere. Maybe it's expand. We should add a tag for that.
Yep.
And that's the great thing about the asset system. This is the same asset system that was, fundamental. The asset system you're seeing in the asset browser is fundamentally the same asset system that was introduced way back in material nodes in, I guess it was R20. And that ability to add tagging is the basis for the tagging in the asset browser now. And that enables some fun stuff like when you search for add, it knows that you want an arithmetic node and arithmetic, potato. And it automatically creates that as an add. This is some of the flexibility of the asset system that's been developing in Cinema 4D under the hood for a while. And this is the beauty of it, is when we start to see all the pieces come together, and we're not totally there yet, but we're getting there.
Yep, it's a big step forward even in this version. I think I'd like to go and show another completely new feature as well. Maybe something like and maybe I'll steer for a minute, but maybe the new tween tool, or what else? What's the next most flashy thing that was in S24? There's some cool. I mean, there's little tweaks, like a couple little additions in the UVs. The selection tag now creates new selection tags instead of overriding the previous one. I mean, there's dozens of tiny things. There's the new car rig for making character. It's a character tool, but it makes a car rig, which is pretty neat.
This is kind of a bridge to Scene Manager, and something that I don't think has gotten a whole lot of exposure. But there's a new, much more powerful grass asset built into the scene manager. So if I just search for grass, I can add that as a modifier. And you can see that we get a really nice grass. And it benefits from all of the speed and performance that Neutron offers. So, we can add the density. And one of the main reasons why we created this is for better compatibility with Redshift. So this allows you to create a really nice grass that works with Redshift. You've got all the ability to adjust the color and the randomization of the grass, but also it has this density texture. And I'm going to jump into the scene node editor real quick, and we'll just create. Actually, I think I can pop it up directly. So we'll choose Edit Asset, and in order to do this, we actually created this geometry property interpolate node. And this node allows you to take a geometry and take any of the channels of that geometry. So if you've got vertex weights or UVs or normals, you can pull those and you can interpolate them based on a given position. So we're interpolating based on the position of each blade of grass, the UVs for the shader, and that shader is the texture that you've chosen for your density. And so that's basically how we're able to modify the density of the asset based on, or of the grass based on that texture property.
Nice. Somebody's mentioning tokens. You're heavily involved in the token system, right?
Yeah, and they're specifically asking about incremental numbers, which was something that CB tokens added in the last version. It was something that was fairly experimental, and it was not always working predictably. So when we brought the rest of the CB tokens tool set over to native S24, things like the date and the OS username and the project author, the render engine, we chose not to bring the incremental tokens over. If those are something that people are really looking for, we could reintroduce those as a new limited set for CV tokens. We could start building out another new set that then Cinema 4D could integrate maybe in one of the later versions.
People who use tokens probably know this, but I pretty much never do. Is it possible to not just create the name of the file, but like a path name as well?
Yeah, so like my typical token is like /renders. So I go into a render subfolder.
So you have a folder already that's called renders? Step me through this because I'm not familiar. So when you put /, what's happening?
/ is the current dot is the current folder, and then when you do /renders, it's going to the folder below the current folder. And then I'll typically do PRJ, so I get
every
the name of the
is
project.
Every slash is you're going down a folder.
Down a folder, yeah. And then sometimes I'll do a take subfolder for what the active take is. And then, if I'm doing something like incremental renders, a lot of times I'll do month, day, year. Yes, Europeans, I'm American. Or you could go year, month, day, if you don't want to confuse anybody. And then you could do hour, minute, second. And then maybe you want to say what the render engine is. And so now if I render this, well, I don't have it saved is the problem. So I'll save the project.
Yeah, if it's looking at dot, then
put it. We'll just put it in here. And then I will save it, or I'll render. And you can see right here that the file name is 210414, so 2021-0414. There is one to get 2021-0414. 1350 224, and then we're using the standard render engine. And if we go and show the file in the Explorer, popped up over here on my other screen, you can see here that here's my file. I'm in the render subfolder. I'm in the
so
token
it made
subfolder
the render.
of that.
Yeah, it actually made these
name
folders.
of the project.
Yeah.
The main folder, which is the name of the take, and then that was my file name.
Very handy. Yeah, when you're working in a team, I can imagine these things are an absolute must. But typically, I'm working on things by myself, so it's like, yeah, I'll just put in whatever folder I want to.
Yep.
Let's
These
see.
things become really important when you're working in a larger pipeline, of course.
Yep. Yeah, Bobby's happy seeing the grass node. It's like an Easter egg.
Demi's asking about DirectX compatibility for the viewport. So many of you will remember that, I can't remember if it was 22 or 23, we added metal support for the viewport. That, of course, became very important as Apple has continued to improve their OS architecture and their hardware architecture. And adding the metal support to the viewport made it much easier for us to, deliver on M1 and we were able to deliver on M1 the day that it came out. And then similarly on the Windows side, the world is kind of moving away from OpenGL, and so we've implemented DirectX in order to future-proof the application, basically. It's a newer, more robust viewport technology. You're not necessarily going to see any real benefit at this point, but we are putting, the framework in place for, a more robust viewport moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Copy between takes. What does that mean?
I think he's talking about copying overrides between takes. So if we go in here to a take, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new override. And I have had some people ask about this in our ideas box. I'm not sure where the workflow issue is happening, but you should be able to take any of these overrides and just control drag onto a new take, and they'll be in that take as well now. So copying between takes should be possible. I'm not sure if there's something I'm missing with request, or if there's something else that folks are missing there. But this is something that I use extensively in one of my really old tutorials from when R17 and takes came out. There's a tutorial on creating sports logo matchups. And I used copying takes quite a bit in there, or copying overrides between takes quite a bit in there, as we created sort of an easy way to render out all of the different matchups between multiple teams using takes.
So we're pretty much here at the end of the stream. Is there any other features that we didn't tackle today that anyone would like to see a demo of, or have any questions for clarification before we go? Of course, I'm going to be doing the live streams every week, so there will be future opportunities, as well as I mentioned, next week having Casey Hupke, and we're going to be tackling lots of stuff with nodes, and who knows what we'll make. I'll probably have a conversation with him this week and make sure that he's still available and what we might try and go into. But of course, everybody's like 30 seconds behind us, so we got to give them a minute to catch up. So yeah, the tween tool is pretty exciting if you do any character animation. I feel like it's mostly useful in the context of character animation, because that's where you're going to be clicking it hundreds of times. And then there's the new tweaks to the F-curves, which I think are actually more significant than I had even realized at first, where before you would select your F-curves, everything would turn orange. You didn't know what you had anymore. And
right.
now they just get highlighted. I even feel like the lines look a lot cleaner in general. They just are rendered nicer looking.
Yeah, we work to make them a lot thicker, and yeah, as you select them now, they thicken up rather than turning orange, so it makes it a lot more obvious what curve is selected. And then here you can see sort of the difference between the old curve interpolation and the new. This is the old, and you can see that I cannot pull this curve any further over, and I actually get to a situation here where I'm overlapping, which is impossible in F curves. You can't animate in two places at the same time. So there were issues with the way that we were interpolating these curves, and so we switched from I think it's from a cubic to a Hermite, or from a Hermite to a cubic interpolation. But basically now you get very predictable animation curves. We've improved the remove overshoot functionality, and you can create very snappy animation now, where things go and this kind of snappy animation is something that you couldn't achieve before.
Yeah, unfortunately, we still got that low frame rate, but the curves are looking way better.
I forgot we had a low frame rate. But yeah, you can try them for yourself, obviously. And then if for some reason you do need the old curves, or if for some reason you like them, there is the R23 evaluation checkbox here. You can check that and switch the curves to the old format for compatibility or whatever.
Somebody else is asking about Redshift node materials. Is there any updates in them? I guess it goes to, I don't even know. I only just started using the Redshift node materials recently. And I guess I'm just wondering what's not working. And I'm not saying that there's not things to be requested. I'm just saying I'm not familiar with some of the limitations that people might be bumping into.
Yeah, we're aware of some of the limitations. The main emphasis in this cycle, of course, it was a huge effort to get Redshift on the Mac, and so that's been a huge emphasis. The work to get OSL into the Redshift core. But then the main emphasis with regard to the C4D integration has been these updated render settings. So we have this basic advanced tab now. So on the basic tab, you've got a really simple view of the most important settings in order to get your renders dialed in. The basic quality, the denoising settings, the motion blur, the global illumination, and then sort of your depth, and then turning on RTX, of course. And then if you want to get into sort of the nitty-gritty details, you can click into the advanced tab, and here you can dial in things like you can turn off automatic sampling and dial in the overrides, or you can go into the various globals and set the trace depths. You can go in and modify your AOVs, and anything that you modify in here, basically if you go back to the basic tab, it'll just say, hey, you can still modify these parameters in the basic mode, but just so you know, the advanced settings have a few things that are tweaked.
Yep, very handy, very quick to jump into that, and I think that's going to be super helpful for anybody using Redshift. And I don't think we went into it too much, but if you have Redshift the newest Redshift installed into the newest Cinema, then a bunch of the stuff got integrated throughout the entire interface. So like the lights are now in the light menu, and the IPR is directly in the viewport. So integrated all over the place.
Right. Yeah. I find it super helpful to have the Redshift IPR settings just right here on the viewport. Makes it really easy to get a render kicked off, which is going to be black because I don't have any lights and I have classic C4D materials. You get the idea.
Yeah. Do you know, in regards to the F curves, do you know what a hard braking is? I'm not sure I follow the question.
I wasn't sure I followed that one either, other than maybe referring to the fact that you can get that nice sharp curve now in the F curves.
Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything we have time for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and hanging out. It was really fun. Thank you so much, Rick, for joining me on the live stream.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm sure we'll be seeing Rick again in the future. It's always great to pick his brain about the new things in cinema. And he's one of the very, very few people in the world that when I have a question that Rick might actually have an answer for me when it comes to cinema.
Every now and then, but pretty much you stumped me.
A couple of quick things. As I mentioned, Casey Hupke's going to be joining next week. You should definitely come and check that out. The 3D motion show, I think, might be done for the day. I'm not sure or not, but there'll be another day of it tomorrow. But you guys are doing live streams from that almost to something like every month at this point.
Yeah, I believe they're even doing 2 a month, but the whole schedule is up on 3dmotionshow.com. I mean, you won't see what presenters are coming in future shows, but you can keep hitting this right arrow. And June, July, August, September, it's once a month, it looks like. In September, we've got a multi-day show. And then October,
I jumped off your screen,
show.
So.
Oh, sorry.
It's just up there.
But
definitely go and check out the rest of the presentations. And there'll be replays for those, of course. I've got my whole R24 video. It's over an hour long, going decently in depth in pretty much all the features. Not quite everything, but most everything. And then, very, very important, I'm going to put a link for this in the chat. Rocket Lasso is currently in beta for our next plugin. I can't really talk about it yet, but it's going to be wrapping up in the beta and it's going to become available. So I put a link to join the Rocket Lasso newsletter. So if you want first word of the new tool when it launches, that's going to be the best way to get the information. In the entire existence of Rocket Lasso, I've only done 2 newsletters, so don't worry about it spamming. They're a pain to put together, and I hate getting spammed with newsletters. So it's only when there's really important stuff coming out that I release anything. So join those newsletters.
I've gotten a sneak peek, folks. It's a really great plugin, so you're going to want to hear about it when it comes out.
Thanks, man. So that'll wrap this one up. I'll see everybody a week from now, and that should do it. Thanks again, Rick, and we'll see everybody later. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Oop, and now I lost the button. Where is... There it is.